Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I know we have folks all over the country, and there's going to be a lot in this presentation. But while I have your attention, I'm going to give you as much as I can about raising your awareness about gambling and a gambling disorder. So here are some learning objectives. We're going to do a lot today. As I say, the slides, you can always get the slides from Lori after this is over. So don't worry if you can't read everything that the slides are going to give you. So we're going to do warning signs and risk factors, similarities and differences between gambling disorder and substance use disorders, which are many. We're going to do the co-occurring factors, and then we're talking a little bit about recovery, since a lot of this is for the recovery community, the barriers, the pathways, reoccurrence, which is a more strength-based, less stigmatizing word for relapse, recovery supports, and we're going to identify some resources for you. So here's a picture I use, and we don't really have time to do a lot of hand raising, but look at this for a minute and see if you can find the hidden tiger in this picture. Just look for a second. Those of you who have taken this training before see this. I start with this slide all the time because the whole idea of gambling is that it may be hiding in plain sight, that it presents in a way that other addictions don't. Okay, so I'm going to give you the answer. You'll find the words written in the tiger. So the going down his neck, hidden across his body, and tiger going down his leg. And again, I use this because it's a really good visual image of, as we move forward in the presentation, you'll hear me talking about the hidden addiction that's hidden, symptoms are hidden, signs are hidden. You just think of the hidden tiger as sort of an encapsulation of what a gambling disorder is right now in terms of lack of awareness and the obviousness of this. So if I asked you to define gambling, think of a couple words that might be in the sentence. Gambling is what? What words might be in there? I'm only going to give you a second because we have a lot to do. So here's one of my favorite definitions. There are many, but this is something called by Schaefer and Korn, risking something of value. Doesn't have to be money. Risking is the word. Risking. Gambling is about risk. Risking something of value on the outcome of an event when you're not sure you're going to win, right? When the probability of winning is less than certain. And that covers so much in life. Getting up in the, when we used to go in our cars and travel places, that's gambling. Gambling you're going to get from point A to point B. That's risking something of value in your life on the outcome of an event that you're going to drive and get something safety when you're not sure that's going to happen. The older you get in life, the less certain we are that things are going to happen the way we expect them to. But if you think about that with gambling activities, it's just a good way to define what is gambling, what's not. Well, because if you do a screening, people will say, well, I play the lottery, but that's not gambling. Well, it is risking something of value when you're not sure you're going to win. And I love this slide. So if you bet on a horse, that's gambling. If you're playing cards, you make 3 spades. Well, no, that's entertainment. And if you're in business and you bet on cotton, it goes up 3 points, that's business. That's not gambling. Are you sure? If you play bingo at your church, that's charity. So what's the difference? There is no difference. Gambling is any activity or game where you risk something of value or money on an outcome that is not guaranteed. And we say value versus money because gambling is not always about the money, nor do you have to gamble with money. Though that ends to be the substance, and gambling is how you get high. If you're in prisons, people gamble with favors on the outside. They'll gamble with canteen. They'll gamble with whatever's available. So the whole idea is just keep in mind that the definition is risking something of value, whatever that may be. Could be your freedom if you're in jail. Could be your life if you're living your life recklessly, if you're putting your life at risk because of your gambling, where you're not sure you're going to win.
So just briefly, a little stats for you. So 85% of the US have gambled at least once in their lives, 60% in the past year. My personal opinion is if you really talk to all those people that were interviewed and said, did you enter a raffle this year? That 60% might be higher. That 85% in their lives might be close to 100. 48 states have gambling. The only ones that don't have it are Hawaii and Utah. And just a glimpse of Massachusetts because it's so telling. This prevalence survey was commissioned by the Mass Gaming Commission when casinos came to Massachusetts in 2011. And I include it because the numbers to me are a little outstanding. So disordered gambling, which is the DSM-5 term for gambling disorder, disordered gambling, they did a survey and they found that 2.2% of people in Massachusetts, 2.2, have a gambling disorder. That means a diagnosable gambling disorder. We'll get into that in a minute. So that's, you know, between 83,000 and 135,000. Let's round that in the middle at 100,000, right? And then in the US, given that criteria, there could be 5.6 million adults with a gambling problem. But the second part is really more telling, was surprising even to me, that they found that 8.4% of Massachusetts adults are at risk. And here's the definition: gambling behaviors that put you at risk for developing a gambling disorder. And look at those numbers. So let's say you take 404, let's round that up to about, you know, 450,000, plus you add the 100,000. That's 550,000 adult residents in Massachusetts who may be at risk for a gambling disorder. And then you look at the 22 million adults in the US who are at risk for a gambling disorder. So in other words, there's a lot more people out there than people think, either at risk or with a diagnosable one. And here's the at-risk part, right? So gambling, like everything else, is a continuum. Those who work with folks in recovery from other substances know that you didn't just, your first drink wasn't didn't put you all the way down to the end of being someone with an alcohol problem, right? You start slowly. And so everybody starts slowly when it comes to addictions. And with gambling, you know, most of the people in the world are either no gambling or they're social gamblers. But then you have someone who maybe, you know, the example I give is, say, a senior citizen. A lot of senior centers run trips down to the casinos, and you have somebody Ellen, who goes on the bus, and she goes to every trip, and you know, she goes every year. And then one year she's lost her husband recently, right? So she's been a social gambler for years and years and years. And one time she goes down with her friends through the senior center, and she wins some money. Oh, that's exciting. She feels really good. She hasn't been feeling, you know, very happy because she's had some trauma in her life, the loss of her husband. And she decides that the next day she wants to go down, but she goes by herself. She's moved a step down the continuum, right? She's gambling. Now she's starting to do it alone, and maybe more frequently. And then she brings about $100 and she loses it, and then she goes home, say. Then the next time she goes back, she goes, well, I don't want to do that again. Next time she brings more money, she loses it, she goes to the ATM, she gets more money, and she's continuing to gamble. We're going to do warning signs in a minute, but that's one of them. Gambling longer than you intended, gambling alone, increasing the amount of money you spend, and going more frequently. And then at one point, so Ellen, she now, and it could be over years or it could be over months, she's gone from social gambling. There's a trauma in her life. It's not always necessary to have a trauma in your life, but sometimes that can be the tipping point. We don't always know where the tipping point is. And now she's moved down towards a gambling disorder. And it can happen very quickly. And, you know, sometimes when I go to senior centers and do a presentation, they're like, don't take away our buses because we want to go to the casino. I'm like, I'm not the fun police. I'm not going to take away your bus, but watch out for Ellen. If this woman you've known for years all of a sudden doesn't have any money, but goes on every trip to the casinos or is asking to borrow money, those are warning signs. And one of the reasons that gambling is so important to know about is that it's everywhere right now. It's on your phone. I always say you can lose your car sitting in your car playing on your phone. You can lose your house playing online poker or something in your house. It's convenient. It's accessible. It's all over the place. And right now with COVID-19, certain online types of gambling have skyrocketed because the casinos are closed or people don't want to go out to. Actually, a lot of places aren't even selling the lottery. It's becoming anonymous and social. So if you're a woman and you want to go to the casino, you can. No one's gonna give you any trouble in the casino. And women gamblers, while still, so one of my pathways to recovery was through Gamblers Anonymous, and it is still mostly men, but there are women that go, and it's growing, unfortunately. And then, of course, gambling is perceived as a source of revenue. And it'll be interesting to see what happens after COVID-19 if more online gambling, like online sports betting or online lotteries, get approved in states to make up for the lost revenue. And it's hard to compete with money that goes towards roads and bridges and education. But that's part of the hidden tiger part. And here, you guys might recognize this. You have a McDonald's Monopoly game. You have Stop and Shop, which is, I think it's up in Maine as well. That looks like a scratch ticket. It's not. That's what you get when you give $1 to the Jimmy Fund. This is Shaw's. The Monopoly is Shaw's. So these are all, that's all gambling. You're risking something of value. Well, let's see, on the Jimmy Fund, you're donating your dollar. And then you could win up to $10,000 instantly. Who wouldn't want to do that, right? And you get a free set of French fries. A lot of the, the impetus, I think, as well as the revenue, is this. Gambling is influenced. Is it the problem or is it the solution? The factor of hope. You cannot, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and you can't underestimate the power of hope. I always make the joke that I'm an optimist. Generally, I'm an optimist in life, which has served me very well through some very difficult times. But it did not serve me well when I was a gambler because I always thought I was going to win. The factor of hope is insidious, it's embedded, and is really hard for those of you who are clinicians out there, or those who work with people in recovery, and they get that they can't drink or use drugs anymore or something like that, but they still scratch tickets and they think, well, but because maybe, yeah, the factor of hope is a powerful, powerful motivator. And for some, gambling is this problem, some it's a solution, and for some, it's in between. Just briefly about gambling language. And I myself, I will admit that I'm learning to try to change my language to make it more strength-based. But just for those of you who are working with gamblers, so the non-stigmatizing is a person who, instead of calling them a problem gambler, which I'm training myself to do that, is a person experiencing a gambling disorder. Instead of saying compulsive gambler, disorder gambler, gambling addict, person with a gambling disorder. Reoccurrence of gambling instead of relapse. And person in recovery or meeting recovery goals instead of clean. Those of you who've been to the Recovery Coach Academy know that they have quite a bit of section on language and how important it is for the proper use of language to reduce shame and stigma. And gambling is no exception. So warning signs, there's a kitty cat raising his hands. So most people, as we saw from the statistics, gamble with no harmful effects. They set the limits. That's part of the responsible gambling kind of stuff. You take $100, you go with friends, you're going to go there for 3 hours and you're going to go home. That's setting limits and sticking to them. But for this population we talked about, 2.2% up to 8.4% at risk, that's almost 10%. That's over 10%. It can be more than a game. And some of the warning signs we just talked about. Gambling more than you intended, the woman on the bus. Continually talking about it. Now, that's a warning sign until they've gotten into real trouble, and then they're not going to talk about it at all because they don't want anybody to know that they're gambling. Spending more time or money than you think, than you can afford. Going to win back your losses, chasing your losses. People know that expression. They know that if someone says, I lost, well, for one thing, gamblers will often say, I won or broke even. It's pretty hard to get them to admit to a loss. Or let me be nice about this, to accurately reflect the amount of that loss. Going back to chasing your losses, borrowing, stealing, selling things, doing whatever you can to get money, to continue to gamble or to pay money. Because remember, money is the substance, right? Money is the substance. Gambling is how you get your high. That's how you get your kick. So you want to get the money you need to do that for however long you can if you have a gambling disorder or attending in that way. Financial difficulties is a warning sign. Often people will say, when you talk to them about gambling, they say, well, I have a financial problem. We get this in GA all the time. Yeah, you do, but you also have an emotional problem. You have an addictive problem. And that's very hard for people to contemplate because they say, but I have all this money, so I owe all this money. So I have to keep gambling so I can pay back the money. And then, sort of one of our responses, those of us in GA, and when I talk to folks on the helpline, well, if you stopped right now gambling, if you stop now, you're not going to lose any more money. So you won't get further into debt. But that is really hard. The hope factor, like, oh no, next time I'm going to go out, I'm going to hit it, is really strong and powerful. Gambling to escape problems and boredom. Being criticized for others, these are similar to substance use. Warning signs, hiding it. There's the hidden tiger. It's easier to hide gambling than almost any other addiction. and missing, not fulfilling your responsibilities. So real quickly, my story, I said I was a alcoholic and a compulsive gambler in recovery, is that I quit drinking in 1992. And for those of you in recovery, I do a lot of work at the peer recovery centers here in Massachusetts. And the reason I love doing that work is that I emphasize the difference between abstinence and recovery, right? So abstinence is what I did. I quit drinking. I didn't go to AA. I didn't go to counseling. I just said, my father was an alcoholic in recovery. And I went, okay, it's genetic. That's that. I'm done. And yay me, I was very happy with myself and, very proud that I had stopped drinking without any damage in my life. But what I didn't do is I didn't go in recovery. And there's a big difference. And those of you who work in the field know what I'm talking about. So about 13 years later, when I was 50, 2005, for whatever reason, whatever was going on in my life, whatever risk factors were there that I didn't know about, which I would have known about if I'd been in recovery, I went to a conference in Reno. I took money with me. I went to all my conference stuff. I hadn't fallen off the edge of irresponsibility yet. And I played the slot machines and I won. I won like $4,500. I came home with $4,500, which was amazing. But it was really more the feeling, a feeling I had. Here's something nicer to look at. This is a gift of recovery. I took a trip to California, first vacation in years. This is the Julia Pfeiffer Burns Beach near Big Sur. And my story beginning, I never thought I would ever see that kind of sight again. So I won and I went home. Totally tipped over. I didn't know. I learned so much of this after I went in recovery and after I got in the field and learning about all this. So I began to obsess about the slot machine, that one slot machine. And we're going to talk about why. Why would I wanted to get back to this one slot machine and this one hotel and this one place in the world, because that was my slot machine. It liked me. It gave me money, sent me home happy. So I thought it was actually just the beginning of a very, very long journey, which I'm still in. So that was like March 2005, and I obsessed about going back there for a while. I never did. And I ended up about a year later, I did some online stuff, but I really liked the casino setting. And so, I'm too close to the camera. Around July 2006, I started going to Foxwoods. And within 6 months, I had lost tons and tons and tons of money, like over $300,000. And we're going to talk about that, why I did that so much in a minute. And so it was out of control. And I'm going to stop there for a sec because I want to go into the DSM-5, okay? This is a DSM-5. So gambling disorder is the only behavioral disorder that's under the addictive section. All right. So it's substance-related and addictive disorders, and you can see the scale there, non-substance related addiction disorder. And these are the warning signs. So, I went to this conference in Reno. There I won on that machine. So I started thinking about the machine, preoccupied, reliving that high. It was a spinny thing, and sometimes it tripled, and it was, oh my God, it was like top of the world ma kind of feeling. And so then, when I came home and I started going down to Foxwoods, I started doing number 2. So one of the similarities between gambling and substance use is tolerance, right? So the $1 slot machine wasn't enough. The 5, the 10, the 25, I was doing $100 slot machines, playing the slots, $200 a pull or a spin. And you can lose a lot of money really, 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 really fast. But I was putting in as much as I possibly could. If there'd been, God forbid, if there'd been a $500 one, I probably would have done that. I was really off the edge by that point, but I didn't even know it. I was trying to get the high. So I thought to myself, the greater the risk, the greater the reward, right? The more, higher payout, but really it was the greater the rush. And that's what I was looking for. I was looking for that rush I wanted to live in, that moment when the wheels were going round and round. That's the moment of possibility. That's the moment of anticipation. That's the moment, for whatever reason, I wanted to live in forever. And so that's why I was doing it at that high level. So unsuccessful attempts to stop. This is not unusual for any addiction. Several times I tried to stop when I lost $60,000 in one weekend and I had an anxiety attack. I thought never again, but it didn't take me very long. It's an addiction, right? It didn't take me very long to start rationalizing my way. Well, I'll go back, I'll put more money in, play longer, whatever. Restless or irritable, that's withdrawal. And believe me, if there was a day that I had manipulated my life, gotten my money, figured out how I was going to go to the casino without telling my family. I had a wife, I had a kid, I had a job, I had a house in the burbs. I had a lot in my life. I had everything in my life. I had worked for my whole life. And here I was just wanting to escape it. So when I couldn't go for some reason, I got withdrawal. My withdrawal was TMJ, headaches, migraine, stomach aches, because my body was anticipating this rush of dopamine, right? This anticipation of happiness. And I didn't get it. So that's the withdrawal part of gambling. Escaping problems, pretty obvious. There you're chasing losses, lies, lies, lies. So I obviously began to lie. Nobody knew I was doing the kind of gambling I was doing. And then the second to last one, lost a significant relationship. So if I'd lost $300,000 in 6 months and I was not a Rockefeller, someone who is addicted to something, when they run out of their substance, what do? Anything, because all they want to do is keep using, right? I wanted to keep gambling. So once I had run out of all my legitimate sources, credit card maxed out, home equity line maxed out, savings account wiped out, borrowed money, all that, I started stealing money from my employer. And you can see lost a significant relationship job, relies on others to provide money. And I began to steal money. And eventually in November 2007, I was caught. And by June 2009, I was spending 2 years in MCI Framingham, serving 2 years for larceny. So I'm 54 years old, just like that, right? March 2005, Reno, that win, that slot machine that liked me, to June 2009. While I was in jail, my house got foreclosed on, my wife divorced me, I obviously had no career, I had no money, I had no reputation, I betrayed the trust of everybody I knew, all because of gambling in 4 years, Now granted, I was at risk. So, I mean, you've all tuned in today, so you know that this is an issue. Could be an issue for people you work with, could be an issue with someone you love. Never underestimate the destructive power of a gambling disorder. And one of the things about it is this hope fantasy thing. I love this graphic because you start with a hope fantasy, whatever it is, hope that I feel better, hope that I get more money, hope that, everybody says, I want to win the lottery and I'll buy my mother a car, whatever. So with gambling, you have this hope, you have this fantasy, which the world at large supports. You gamble, you get into debt, because ultimately if you keep gambling, you will get into debt. And then, like me, you turn to crime because you want to keep gambling to either pay off your debt or you keep gambling or whatever. You do any of these things, you go to prison. Like me, you come out, you're unemployed. So I was 56 years old when I got out of jail. And looking at the time, I was 56 years old when I got out of jail. Luckily my child was still in my life and my ex-wife, we were all still able to live together. And then ultimately I was able to find affordable housing. I had a lot of support, but many people get out of prison. They have a record, they have no money, especially if they're there for larceny, right? If they're there for gambling, they have no money. What you do with your winnings? Judges will actually ask. I gambled them. It's sort of a strange thing in the criminal justice system. People don't get it. They make jokes about it all the time, probation officers and things. A hidden tiger. It's just not recognized for what it is. And how easy would it be when you have no money, when you're working an 8-hour job, $8 an hour job at the bagel shop, when you just got out of jail and that's your pre-release job, right? To go back to gambling. So the hope and fantasy and the cycle of it is very compelling. Some risk factors. Some of these are pretty easy to spot. So an early win. So sometimes when I talk about in trainings about lottery tickets, and if you give a lottery ticket to a kid, let's say they're a 10-year-old kid, and then you give them a lottery ticket and they scratch and they win $50. They could think of that win for a long time. That rush of dopamine, that thrill, that, oh my God, And when you give somebody a scratch ticket, you ultimately could be giving them nothing. You think about it like money-wise, right? But what we're giving, and we don't really talk about it, but what you're giving is anticipation. and the thrill that comes with anticipation. Like for me now, that's the first cup of coffee in the morning. I was like, whoa, I love my first cup of coffee in the morning. The anticipation, that makes you happy, that makes your dopamine fire. So, so that's one of them. And living within 50 miles of a casino, you can see the stats there. Millions and millions of people live within 50 miles of a casino. And now more and more online stuff is going to happen. I don't know how that's going to affect the risk factors, but certainly the easier it is to get to, the easier it is to give into it. Certainly age 18 to 24, male, no surprise there, risk-taking. Smoking is a stimulus, and so is gambling. Cohorting disorders, we're going to talk about that. Being isolated, having nothing else in your life but wanting to gambling alone, and often victims or perpetrators of domestic violence are often at risk. Okay, oh, sorry, emotional difficulties. So here, you can read this list, but two of them I want to talk about: distorted expectations about winning and illusion of control over outcomes, right? So this is what is the beginning of what I'm going to talk about in the gambler's fallacy. So when I won on that machine in Reno, I wanted to go back to it, right? I felt like I said, that machine liked me, that there was a little guy in there that said, Jodie, you work hard, let's give you some money, I honestly felt I had a control over that slot machine. I had no control over a slot machine. It's a random number chip generator. Now, if you've ever been to a bingo hall, people will bring, I've heard, I haven't been there, they'll bring trolls, little pink-haired plastic dolls like they think can imbue their cards with luck, or where they sit, or how many cards they have. People you might know who wear their lucky hat to the horse track, or whatever they do. We want to feel in control, I think, as human beings. And so we use totems and lucky charms and, whatever we can. And with gambling, it is so dangerous because this is the cognitive distortion for you clinicians out there. This is the stinking thinking for those of us in recovery that is really hard to get through. What do you mean I can't win? Of course I'm going to win. Oh, I don't win all the time, but I'm going to win eventually. Illusion of control over outcomes. Really, really, really difficult thinking to break. And it's called the gambler's fallacy, right? The gambler's fallacy is basically believing that something with a fixed probability, it's going to come higher or lower as a process repeated. So if you've ever been to a casino and you've been in the slot machine section, you'll see some people say, this is my machine, just how I felt, that machine, even if they put in thousands and thousands of dollars, that eventually that machine's going to pay out. Well, that's not true. The random number stuff is, it comes up when it comes up. But the cognitive distortion on this is so strong. And here's something that it reinforces it, right? So your local 7-Eleven has a Powerball winner. What do? Millionaire made here. Are you next? They put up a big sign, right? And all of a sudden, oh my gosh, this little mom and pop store, their income goes through the roof because all these people come rushing into the store. Because all of a sudden, because there was a winner, and everybody loves a winner, and no other addiction calls you a winner, like gambling disorder, no other addiction rewards you in the same way that gambling does. Everybody loves a winner, so they come rushing to the store because it's a lucky store now. I mean, they may have one winner in like 30 years of operation, but that sign's going to stay up there for a long time, I can tell you that. And people believe, we want to believe. And again, that's the compelling part, the addicting part, the insidious part of this disorder. So here's an interesting graph. I think you guys can see that. Let me see if I can get here we go. So this is the problem gambler support the group, and this was a non-problem group. This is our brain. Yay, big brain. The bottom, so imagine if you were looking at a slot machine and it said 7-7 cherry, right? If a 7-7 cherry comes up, most people go, oh, I didn't win. So the brain doesn't spike. There's the blue, right? That's the blue. And then you have a slot machine and it goes 7-7-7. It's like, woo, yay, everybody loves a winner. Winner, winner, chicken dinner, right? Everybody brain goes happy. Everybody does a dance. And if you're a problem gambler, you're probably alone and you do a little happy dance, or I would just smile like, of course I won, man, of course, But if you're a non-gambler, so to speak, and people are around you, they're all cheering, yay, yay, yay. But here's the interesting part. If you are, let's say it's a 7-7 and almost 7, you know what that means? Like almost, like not quite, but almost 7. For the non-problem group, that's a loss. Their brain doesn't register any higher than if it was a 7-7 cherry and an outright loss. But for a gambler, look at this. It's called a near miss. For me, that is almost a win. That's like a win. That's so close, so close, so close. So like next, oh look, oh my God, it gives me almost the same rush as an outright win. And that's what keeps me going and going and going and going. And that is forever in my brain, forever changed. I don't think I'd ever be able to, I won't, hopefully, ever gamble again. But if I ever had that situation, a 7-7, almost 7, it would still always register as a win in my brain. And that's part of my addiction and why one of the reasons behavioral health addiction, why it was put in the DSM-5. So here's a really nice way of saying it. Some folks say the cup is half empty. Some say it's half full. Gamblers say it's going to be full any minute now, right? There's the optimism. Any minute now, it's going to be full. Okay. So that's your big picture view of gambling. We're going to talk a little bit about substance use. So the NCRG, which is National Council on Responsible Gambling, says folks with psychiatric and addictive disorders are especially vulnerable. Individuals with family members are also at risk. 3 out of 4 gamblers are also alcoholics like me. About 40% also have a drug disorder. 60%, like me, I quit smoking also when I was 25, are nicotine dependent. And then you have the mental health disorders. So one of the reasons that it's so important to me to get into the peer recovery centers, and for those of you who are working in recovery supports right now, is to recognize that if I'm talking to a group, and I do a lot of gambling awareness groups at peer recovery centers, and I'm just sort of raising their awareness like I'm doing with you and saying, hey, if you're here for, you're in recovery for drugs or alcohol, be mindful. Be mindful of the whack-a-mole game, right? That you could be scratching tickets, and I'm not the fun police, so I say, I'm not telling you not to gamble. I'm just saying be very mindful. If you're scratching a ticket and you're getting a little rush in your brain, and it's reminding you how you felt when you used, say, heroin, if that feeling's coming back, or cocaine, very similar, cocaine and gambling, the highs are very similar. If that's reminding you, then you are at risk for 2 things. Either you could whack-a-mole to another addiction, like gambling, or you could go back to the one you're in recovery from. So you can't underestimate the power of having, maybe drugs and alcohol, and you have a depressive disorder. And I tell you, I look around a GA room, and I'm not doing a scientific survey or anything, but almost everybody there has something else. We all have something else. Not everybody, but almost everybody has something else other than gambling. And just latches on. Similarities, you recognize these, certainly preoccupation, the cravings, the tolerance, you talked about that, the withdrawal, we talked about that, emotional difficulties that may lead somebody towards some kind of disorder. And then, sometimes people will say, if I'm in a recovery center, they'll say, well, I'd like to buy a couple tickets. I'm like, well, okay, can you pay your rent? Do you go to your job? You take care of your kid? Yeah, okay. As long as it's not causing a negative consequence in your life, I don't have a problem with that. You just be very mindful of what it's doing in your life. And for those in recovery, if they're really working recovery, they know a lot about mindfulness, right? Thinking about it, pausing for a second and seeing how it feels. Because some of the things that can be very dangerous are the differences, right? So there's no substance per se. I see money as a substance, gambling, how you get high, but it's not a chemical thing that's going in your body. Though, I have a gambler friend who says his substance is always in his brain. It's dopamine is his substance. But there's technically no substance that goes into your body. There's certainly less public awareness and acceptance of it, right? People are like, what do you mean you can't? What do you mean you're a gambler? What are you, degenerate? Yeah, there's a language. And anything with money is just, it's very complicated. We're going to talk about that in a minute. There's a hidden tiger. The day that I got fired from my job for embezzlement, I had to come home to my wife and my house in the burbs and this really great life I had and say, this is what I did, and I'm probably going to jail. And I did, 54 years old, going to jail, me. There was no indicator of that. There was no warning sign that anybody could see. If I'd been in recovery, I would have seen it, but I didn't. So lots of times when I've talked to folks on the helpline, you know, hardest calls are from a family member who calls and says, my husband just told me he's gambling and we're going to lose our house and he lost his job and we're in debt. What am I going to do? The invisible factor of this disorder is really hard on everybody. The near miss phenomenon, we talked about that. Bailout. You know, sometimes folks will call me on the helpline and say, you know, my son owes money to a bookie. I want to give him the money to give it to him. And you know, usually what we encourage people to do is never give money to a gambler to pay off a debt. That's like giving cocaine to a cocaine addict so that they give it to somebody else. You know, it's not going to work that way. If someone's worried, you can pay them off. But for the most part, the gambler has to take responsibility. In GA, bailout is you know, something that we don't normally promote. I had to declare bankruptcy because it was like $500,000 of bankruptcy, and it was just too much to ever come out of my life with it. But I took responsibility for all my finances, and I learned to have a new relationship with money. But if you bail out a gambler, if you pay off all their debts down to zero, if they're not in the stage of change that is moving towards action, meaning reducing or stopping their gambling, they're just going to ratchet that back up. No saturation point. So you know, I say when you go in a bar and you drink and whatever, you're eventually going to pass out or stop drinking. There's a saturation point. With gambling, you have money, air to breathe, time to spend, and you can gamble for as long as you want. You know, there is no saturation point. You never pass out from gambling. The fantasies of success and magical thinking, there's a cognitive distortion about next time, just imagining that you're going to win all this money and buy a house for your mom and that kind of thing. You know, that it's just amazing how strong that is. And then the reward factor, right? So you go into a bar and you don't expect you're going to come out with the money to pay your mortgage, but you might. So, you know, that's the reward factor of that. Again, I've heard people who are in therapy and they're doing really well in therapy, and all of a sudden they have a slip, they scratch a ticket, they win $5,000, and they're like, see you later, counselor, because the reward factor is so compelling. Here's just a nice little image. I love this. The drinkers on the left and the gamblers on the right. Problem drinkers are often in the position to become problem gamblers. Gambling disorder and suicide. Here's some stats for you about suicide in general. And on the third bullet point, you can see that the DSM-5 said that half of the individuals who are in treatment, half of those in treatment for gambling disorder have thought about suicide, and 17% have attempted it. But I can tell you that in GA, we have something called 20 questions, right? And the very last question is, have you ever considered self-harm or suicide as a result of your gambling? We all nod our heads. We've all thought about it. You know, and the analogy I make in terms of it being totally under invisible tiger, the hidden tiger, right? Totally underreported is, you know, if I had a bad weekend at Foxwoods, and I had many, and if I had driven off the road and crashed and killed myself on purpose, who would know, right? You know, as I say, there's no talk screen that can register regret or remorse. And so the gambling has the highest suicide rate of any other addiction. And it's something to be really considered because the money part is so hard. The money and the loss of trust, because usually by the time you're caught or somebody finds out about, you've betrayed everybody you love. And as we know, those of us in recovery know that there is no moral compass when it comes to addiction, that those we love, we say we love them, but yet we're going to do what we want and we're going to wreck their lives as a consequence of our actions. So, you know, you owe $100,000, $200,000, you owe the IRS, you owe a lot. Sometimes suicide is an outcome of that. And for those of you who work with folks in recovery and those of you clinicians out there, it's something to keep in mind because money is really hard. So let's talk about it. So money means different things to different people, right? It's useful, it's symbolic, it's emotional. But for a gambler, it fits in a whole different way, and it totally is the thing that you need to gamble, right? So it's the substance being used. And for those of you working with gamblers, you have to, recovery coaches or clinicians, the value and the use have to be talked about. You have to talk about money. And gambling disorder is not about the money, right? It's about the risk. It's about the high, double the high, right? And then the urges that you have is trying to get your money back or getting the new supply. And going on and on, and gamblers often will say, like I said, they'll say they have a financial problem, not a gambling problem, because we don't really ever want to admit that we have a gambling problem, because then we might have to stop. I talked to somebody who was a heroin addict and gambling addict. He quit both. Gambling was harder for him to quit. So you have to be really aware of the compelling part of this fantasy thinking. Financial issues are the result, right? They're not the problem. And bailouts, we talked about that. The role of money is different for problem gamblers versus non-problem gamblers. So for most people, money is a way to acquire something. But for gamblers, they believe that they gamble for the wealth and the grandiosity. Ooh, we love being a big shot. But really, the problem is that the motivation changes. Money becomes the means, right? Gambling's how you get high, right? Money is the substance, gambling is how you get high, and what you want to do is get high. It's not about winning more money. It's never about winning more money, which is why even as a gambler in recovery, I can never enter a raffle, even if it's free. Even if somebody threw my name in a hat and said, you don't pay anything, whatever, and you might win a house. The anticipation, that trigger, would put me out of recovery. I can't ever do that. And problem gamblers will do anything to get money. When they win, they're more interested in using their winnings to gamble than to pocket the money. Some gamblers I know had one pocket for regular money and one pocket for gambling money. And believe me, the regular money was much lower than the gambling money. It's a great movie called Oni Mahoney. I'm going to show you that in a minute. And it talks about how he's driving this beat up. He's spending tons and tons of money on sports betting. And someone says, well, why don't you get a new car? And now you got this promotion. Oh, why should I get a new car? He doesn't want to spend any money replacing his car. He wants to keep it all for gambling. So here's some doggies. So what barriers might a problem gambler face? I'm looking at the time, sorry guys. So here's the barriers to recovery. One, look, winner, winner, everybody is a winner. That's a barrier. It's normalized in our society. Everybody gambles, and if you have a problem with that, there's stigma attached. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean you can't ever buy a raffle ticket again? It's hidden. It's not self-regulated, right? That's the saturation point. The false hope, that magical thinking that next time, thinking that the solution to their problems can be gambling, not that gambling is the problem. The co-occurring factor, the deep-seated damage to the family, what we do to our family, those of us who turn to crime. And many people that I know in the GA program say that while they didn't go to jail, they didn't steal money per se, they stole from themselves. They stole from their kids' college funds or their wife's IRA account. Most gamblers aren't wealthy. So, and even if there were, there's not enough money in the world. You could have $1 billion, and if you were a compulsive gambler at that really high rate, you still would run out of money. Financial ruin is a barrier. It is really hard. And I showed you that cycle. The staggering amounts of restitution, no diversionary programs. So there is no such thing as a drug court. Knowing that you have a debt that you may never be able to repay. The burden of that weighs on you every single day. Hard to find GA meetings. There's 3 in Maine. There's less than 40 in the state of Massachusetts. Hard to find other support programs. Hard to find therapists. Male-dominated support groups, that can be a problem for women. Also a lack of diversity. So some of the negative consequences are this: you get into debt, you're not fulfilling your work or home responsibilities, so you could get fired. You get into legal trouble, you have employment problems, you have repeated social problems, you have a loss of control over gambling. And yet, all you want to do is do it. But recovery is possible, right? So 75% of those who are treated can substantially reduce their gambling, and that the other distresses that go with it can be reduced, and that those of us who commit illegal acts are just as able to get in recovery as those who aren't. I like this slide here because it gives a big picture, and I believe in the big picture. So you see here, here we go. Where's my thingy? So you see here the winning phase, right? Everything we talked about, and then you start losing, then you get, oh my God, remorse, lax, alienation, panic, and then here you are, suicide, other horrible things. But then, if you're lucky, if you have support, if something happens in your life and you turn this corner and up you go, right? The critical phase, you start rebuilding your life. When you get out of jail, you start walking dogs like me, and you start having people who believe in you again, and you're in true recovery, so you're grateful and you're humble, and you start rebuilding your life, and then you maybe get a job. Like I got a job a year and a half after I got out of jail. I got a job at the Mass Council. I mean, how amazing was that? The gifts of recovery. Oh my gosh. And you have to believe in that. And then you start rebuilding your life. And I love that chart. It's an old chart, but I love that it shows both sides of it. So what does recovery look like? I'm not going to go into this very long. This is really just a brief thing about recovery. This is a Samson definition. It's nothing to do with gambling. This is just the process of change that we improve our lives, self-directed lives. And these are the 10 components. If you've never seen this before, definitely go to this website. Definitely go to SAMHSA. Their work on recovery stuff is great, and it can be applied to anything. Here's the little baby chicks and the stages of change. Gamblers, if they are not in the preparation stage, if they don't think they have a problem, there's no way anybody's going to tell them they have a problem. It's very difficult. People call me on the helpline. They say, I have a family member who's gambling. I want to talk to them about it. And so we have to get them into treatment. If they're not open to the idea that it's a problem, it will be very difficult. You can't lead a horse to drink, right? You can lead them to water, but you can't make them drink. Same with the gambler. But that's just a little bit, and that's, MI and CBT are two of the best modalities for treating a problem gambling, because they try to get them to that stage of change where they need to honestly say, enough is enough. My last bet was June 2nd, 2008. So it was about a year before I went to jail. And that was an epiphany, and but I got there when I got there. I was just sick and tired of being sick and tired, really. Here's a little bit on reoccurrence. I got this from Algamus, which is a residential treatment center. It's an organization. They have a residential treatment center in Arizona. Scott Melissa is now working there. He used to work for the council. Great guy. If you ever need somebody to go to a residential treatment center, you can talk to me. But so you have to acknowledge that reoccurrence can happen. The triggers are unavoidable. When I started working at the council, every day I was triggered, but my recovery was strong. So I knew that this was going to happen, and I just have to say, okay, and now it's everywhere. You turn on your phone and there's like a little slot machine game ad. I'm like, next. I have to acknowledge that they're going to happen. Identify what they are. Procrastinate gambling. I don't know if any of you guys know the expression urge surfing. So urge surfing is say, oh my God, I really want to gamble. I really want to gamble. And you're like, okay, let me take 10 minutes and do something else. Let me sing. Let me take a walk. Let me work in the garden. Let me pet my cat for 10 minutes. Just get your head out of that place, that urge surfing. It's a great tool. Invest in a new hobby. Lots of times people say, well, I've never done anything but gamble. It's like, well, part of the recovery is finding other things that interest you. And yeah, you're never going to have the high. This movie I was talking about, Owning Mahoney, I always talk about the last scene. And the last scene is where it's a true story of a Canadian banker who stole money in the 80s, millions and millions of dollars. And he's been ultimately caught. And he's sitting in the therapist's office. And the therapist says, so on a scale of 1 to 100, how do you rate the biggest thrill of gambling? And the gambler guy, it's Philip Seymour Hoffman, great movie. Mr. Mahoney says 100. The biggest thrill he had when he was gambling was 100. And I totally agree. And the therapist said, okay, what's the next biggest thrill you have in your life? 20. And he looks at him like, well, what are you going to do? And Hoffman's like, 20. 20's good. And that's why recovery is so important. Because if you can't get a gambler who's trying to not be a gambler, who is trying to go into recovery, if you can't get them to live at 20 and be okay with 20, it's going to be really hard, because those heights of 100 are really compelling. Get support, master the coping mechanisms. And this is where folks who work in recovery centers know about it. Understanding reoccurrence. I got this off a Canadian website to deal with families. So understand that that reoccurrence will happen, that there are sometimes unexpected triggers. Treat them as serious, but not a reason to despair. This was, again, more for the family. Just because someone has slipped doesn't mean they're going to go off the edge again. And you guys, I'm running out of time, so I'll let you guys read this a little more. But there are some website links there about that. Briefly about Recovery Capital, I just took a Train the Trainer course to become a trainer of Recovery Coach Academy. I love building Recovery Capital because it's a positive, strength-based model. We look at what you have in your life versus what you don't have. If you don't know about it, look up Recovery Capital. There's 3 types. just briefly talks about it. It's a really good way for working with people in recovery who say, you know, I got nothing. I'm not nothing in my life. No, if you look, there is some strength, there is something in your life that can help you. So pathways to recovery from gambling. As a confidential helpline, this is the one in Maine. There's my pointer. Here's the one in Maine. GA and Gam-Non, pressure relief. Pressure relief is a group within GA. So a gambler who wants some help with their finances. They work with a pressure relief coordinator within the GA model. And this is not somebody who's an accountant. They just help them get a budget. There's a packet. They can help them work with credit card agencies, that kind of thing. As I say, it's within the GA group, but it's pressure relief, and it's something a lot of people don't know about, but GA members do. And there's a great meeting in York, Maine, I've been to many times. All recovery meetings are good because sometimes people don't feel comfortable with a GA program because it's small, or they can't get to it, or there's no women in it, or there's no people of color, or nobody, so go to an all recovery meeting. That's okay too. And then there's other 12-step programs, IOPs and inpatient. There is no inpatient center in this area in New England. As I say, in Minnesota, Arizona, Virginia, there's treatment programs, there's exercise yoga, all these things you can see. And I'm going to show you some pictures of the on the line in the rooms. There's apps for the phone, smart recovery. Lots of times I send people smart recovery if the 12-step thing doesn't work, because it is CBT based a little bit. And there's harm reduction. I got to get going here. So you can look at that. There's some links to resources in Maine. Here's just a slide with the 3 GA meetings in Maine. Here's a slide. This is important for anybody. This part over here, these are the international GA calls that are happening right now during COVID-19. So every night you call on this number, you put in this meeting code, and you can find a GA meeting. And locally, these are people I know them. People who are on these calls, I know them. And those are available as an online phone resource as well. Low risk gambling, we talked about that, setting time, losing money you can afford. And then the harm reduction part is the voluntary self-exclusion. If people don't know about that, you can talk with Lori. I mean, it's an amazing tool for people who just want to sort of prevent themselves from going to casino for a certain period of time. It works really well for some people, and they never go back to the casino, and they never go back to gambling. These is just a snapshot of some of the recovery centers in Maine. So yay, Maine. And peer-to-peer stuff is really great. Even if they're not totally gambling aware, they get it. Recovery coaching, there's not a lot in recovery coaching about gambling, but if you're a recovery coach out there, now you can sort of fill in the blanks, about recovery coaching. How you coach a gambling recovery. Remember that you're not a financial planner, that you're not an expert in that, but you can help them distinguish what's going on in their lives, like that maybe it's not about money, help them make some choices in their life and build on their recovery capital. So there's just some suggestions on that. And then here's things, so remember, it's not about the money, right? The gambling is prevalent, less understood, so you have to talk about that. And the hope, the reward, the winner, chicken dinner kind of thing. It's very, very hard, so you just have to recognize with a problem gambler in recovery that they need a little education as well as you about the differences. So we're going to zip through these. These are just some slides, okay? Owning Mahoney, great movie. See that? Hoffman, Minnie Driver, John Hurt. I don't think it's online, but if you can ever get a chance to see it, please do. It's an amazing movie and a really good depiction of a problem gambler. These are some great books. This is the one for the families. This one is the only one I know for families. This is a personal story, and this is really great about women. There are online recovery supports, Smart Recovery, we know about that. They're not gambling specific, but they are at least online. Gam Talk is a really nice resource out there, and you can see gamtalk.org. In the Rooms has every kind of possible addiction on video meetings. It's a really nice all recovery kind of site, and they have video Gamblers Anonymous meetings. Here are just some of the phone apps that I talked about that are, just a way, just a recovery support. There's also Facebook groups like this, Gambling Addiction Recovery groups. And the challenges, or that there's a lack of treatment resources. The insurance part gets in the way, the cultural competency, there's no GA meetings, at least not in this neck of the woods, in any other language but English, the debt, the family issue, the reward concept. Screening, we're not going to get into that too much, but for those of you who are thinking about it, just if you ever want to have a conversation with somebody, first question is, you know, if you gamble, oh, you ever win anything? How does it make you feel? What do you do for fun? That kind of thing. And just briefly, here's a really quick brief biosocial gambling screen, real evidence-based, 3 questions. What can you do? Do what you're doing. Stay with me one more minute. And you can gain awareness, become familiar with what's going on in your agency, know about it, host gambling recovery meetings if you want, ask questions, talk about money, talk about money. We talk about everything in this country, but we don't know what our best friend makes. You can't work with a problem gambler and not talk about money. Okay, so look, I did it. Okay, Lori, whew. That was a lot of information, folks. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry because I got it out.
Great job, Jodie. Thank you so much. That was very informative and powerful and thought-provoking. And I can't wait to look at the slides later and kind of get to digest it a little bit more and look at the resources that you gave us. I will be sending the PowerPoint out to you folks. It may not be today, but trust me, you'll get it very soon. I know that some of you may need to hop off right now. And if you do, thank you so much for joining us. Watch for my email. But if there's anyone that wants to stay on for another couple minutes, we'll take some questions. So have a great day, everyone who needs to log off right now. Jodie, the only question that I saw come through so far was just around, could you share a little bit more about when you talked about giving scratch tickets to children?
Yeah, I mean, I might have gone too fast through that, but the thing is that an early win can happen at any point. You know, it can be at any age. But I think with kids, you know, there's campaigns, I think, in most states not to give scratch tickets to kids at Christmas time because the consequence of a possible win that lingers in their mind, it's not really healthy. And if that family has any other kind of risk factor, a grandfather who's struggling with some kind of addiction or something like that, you're giving them this possibility of hope on something that's based, you know, in a scratch ticket. And I make the joke when I go to recovery peer centers. I like to say, listen, you know, when you're at Christmas time, say, so you put scratch tickets in people's stockings, but do you put fifths of whiskeys in people's stockings? Do you hang packets of cigarettes on the Christmas tree? Do you put an 8-ball into a Yankee swap? Some people say yes, but most people say no. No, they don't do that. So why is it different? Why is giving scratch tickets to children and or adults? Why is that okay? Why is that not viewed as a potential trigger to something greater? And that's what we talk about. In fact, once I was at a training and a clinician came up to me after the training. She showed me this picture of this 2-tier cake and it had scratch tickets all around the outside of the tiers. And she goes, you know what? I think I'm going to take those off because really you're giving them anticipation. You're not necessarily giving them money. And it's just a sort of a dangerous concept, especially with children.
Great, thank you. So AdCare and the Maine Council have participated in that holiday lottery campaign for several years now, but I know that sometimes the word doesn't get out as much as we wish that it would.
Yeah.
There was another question. She says, Jodie, I work in prevention at a community college, and a yearly activity they offer the students is a casino night with fake money. Yeah. As a prevention worker, I'm uncomfortable with this. Any suggestions on how to present my concerns to the folks who plan this activity?
Yeah, I know about that, and sometimes there's real casino nights, and that's even worse. You know, it's so hard because gambling as a destructive force in people's lives is so underestimated. And to say to people like, what's wrong with fake money? Because what's wrong with it is sort of the warning signs and the risk factors. I would just say sort of get familiar with that and the role that money plays. So I think you said college, right? So college students are particularly at risk, right? 18 to 24. And if you have them gambling with fake money, they're still getting the high of winning. They're still getting that high. And it's almost like you're you're potentially feeding another addiction. And how to approach a college community on that, I don't know. It's really hard because people are like, what are you, the fun police? Don't you want to have some fun? And there's something wrong with it. Well, you do some research and, probably for 90% of the kids there, it's not. But are any of them in recovery from alcohol and drugs? Any of them have problems with alcohol and drugs? Is it going to trigger something that might lead to greater risk down the road? It's really hard. I mean, gambling is so woven into our everyday life that to say you're against something like that makes you just seem stuffy. So I would say get really versed in warning signs and risk factors and college age student stuff, and there's tons of stuff online. And talk to the dean of students and see if there's some other activity that can you come up with without using that.
Yeah, I'd also like to mention really quickly that AdCare Maine, since we do have the problem gambling contract with the state of Maine CDC, one of the services that we do offer is we could do a presentation, like a gambling 101 type of presentation specifically for any group in Maine. So we could do it for your college, or we could do, we could do it for student groups. We tailor it to the needs of the group that we're doing it for, but that's at no cost, and that's part of the deliverables in the contract that we have. So feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to offer something like that. I don't think that I saw any other questions, Jodie.
That's because I talk so fast, I couldn't think of them.
No, all I see is tons of positive feedback and kudos. So with that, I guess we will we'll sign off and be watching for an email from me with the evaluation. And thanks so much, everyone. Be safe.
Thanks, everybody. Lori, I'll send you the slides soon.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.